Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be making our very own Peeper Frog crochet bandana. This is something that I've recently added to my shop, and it seems to be getting a little bit of popularity, so I thought that I would show you all how to make one for yourself. So for this tutorial, you'll need 4 types of yarn. You'll need your main color for your bandana, you'll need your frog color, you'll need white or your edging color, and you'll need a little bit of black for the frog's eyes and mouth. In addition to that, you will also need a 3.5 crochet hook. Someone had mentioned in one of the comments of my reels that they thought I used a hook that was too small, and I agree to a point, but I use smaller hooks on my yarn size because I don't like it to be too loose. I like more tighter stitching together, so that is why I use smaller hooks and recommended on the back of the yarn. In addition to your hook, you also need a pair of snips or scissors and a yarn needle. So with that said, let's roll on into this. I'm going to start with my main bandana color. We're going to use this for most of the bandana. And I'm just going to begin by making a slip knot. I'm left-handed. Apologies. Maybe one day I'll flip all of these videos and put right-handed on it, so that way everyone will have a chance to make something. So how I make slip knots is I get my tail yarn in my dominant hand, and I take a piece of the other yarn in my non-dominant hand, and I just wrap it around itself so it looks like that. And then with my hook, I go under the loop, over the tail, and then I wrap the working yarn over it and make a chain, and that's going to start us off. So for this pattern, we're going to make 2 more chains to make 3 total, and then we are going to yarn over and do 2 more DCs into this magic circle. And 2. So this is going to act as our first crochet cluster, and that's how we're going to be working for the majority of this bandana. So once I have my first cluster, I'm going to chain 2, and then we're going to make another DC 3 cluster on this side. So we're going to make 3 DCs back in the loop. And once we have finished that, this is going to count as our first row. So I'm going to take my tail and just tighten it. And that's our first row. So to go to our second row, we are going to chain 3. And then I yarn over before I turn, but we'll turn. And you'll see in this last cluster, we have the first stitch, second stitch, and third stitch. In the top of the third stitch, we're going to do 3 DCs. In the top of that third stitch, we're going to do 2 DCs to make a 3 DC cluster, including this chain. Alright, our next cluster is going to go into the 2 chain gap at the top of our first row. So yarn over and just do 3 DCs. At the top of this row, this is going to be the point. We're going to chain 2 to make that corner, and then do another 3 DCs right into that corner again. And then for our last DC on this row, I like to go in between the last 2 stitches. You can also go, sometimes I go underneath the top stitch, and that way it kind of, I don't know, it's more uniform, but where this is all one color, sometimes I just go right in between the last 2 stitches, and it looks just fine. And like that. We'll do 2 more. Okay, and that is our second row. I promise it doesn't look like much, but it is working along just good. So to start our third row, we're going to do exactly what we did for the last one. We'll chain 3, turn into the top of the last stitch. We're going to do 2 more double crochets to make a 3DC cluster. And then we are just going to continue on. So in the gaps between the clusters is where you're going to work your new 3DC clusters. Every row, because we increase at the top, we are going to have an extra space. So we're going to add 1 more DC cluster. So just work your 3DC clusters, work 2 in the top corner, and then get back down to the side and work into the last gap between the last 2 stitches. So we'll do this one more row. And so this is what our third row finish is going to look like. You'll see it's starting to kind of look like a mini bandana now. But we are just going to continue in that manner. Just chain 3, 3DC in this last stitch, 3DC in each cluster except 2 in the corner, and work your way back around and get to the other side. So we are going to continue working in this manner around until we get to row 8, and then I'll catch back up with you guys. Alright, so now we are 7 rows in, and so what we're going to do is start the 8th row as normal. So I'm going to chain 3, turn my work, and we're basically going to do the same thing until we get to the second gap from the middle. Alright, now I'm on my last stitch in this third gap from the middle, and so I'm going to start it normally, but instead of yarning back over and going through, I'm actually going to change my color yarn to my frog color. Flip it over, pull it through, and that's going to finish off that stitch. So at this point, this is going to be our front, and this side is going to be our back. And I'll show you how that makes a difference on the next row. So for these 2 gaps, the last 2, and also including this one over here, we're going to basically continue the pattern around. Everything is going to remain the same except that it's going to be green. Alright, now I'm on the last stitch of this green part and the second gap from the middle, and I like to trim my blue yarn, so I'm just going to cut it off with a little bit of leeway, that way I can yarn it in, just because I don't like to have like a big string of yarn going across the back. So with that cut, I'm going to go ahead and start that last stitch, but before we close it off, we're going to switch back to our blue, or whatever main color you're using. And we're going to continue on to the end. You do not have to cut your green because whenever we flip it over, we're going to start with the green on this side. And I think it's just easier to not have to worry about it. So we're just going to do our 3DC clusters like normal all the way till we get back to the other end. We'll chain 3, turn our work, and go back the other way. And this time we're going to stop in the third gap from the middle. So this is going to be our first green cluster. And I'll show you how I normally change colors when I get there. Alright, so I'm on my last stitch in the cluster before we change over to green. So I'm going to start my DC. Before I close it off, I'm going to bring this straight into the back, or the back of the piece towards you. And I'm just going to, instead of like wrapping it all the way around, I prefer to just go straight over my hook and just pull it through. And make sure it's not like taut, that way it's not tugging on the front of the bandana. So once that is like that, just do your DC like normal. And if it like pains you to see it, I found that because you can kind of see it on the other side, it blends in well, but sometimes when I'm going through that hole, I'll loop around the like green tail piece that we've used and just do a little makeshift DC. And that way it tugs it just a little bit so that it kind of blends in better. But we'll do our 3 clusters. And we're just going to do the same thing around. We'll do these last 2, and then 1, 2, 3 on this side. And so I'll meet you back here. Okay, so when I get to this last cluster, I like to just tug on my tails tight. Make sure that no stitch is like loose. We'll do our 2 standard DCs. And then the last one, well, let me cut this first. Cut your blue, we'll tie it off later. And then start your last DC. Oh, missed it. And you get to that second one, same thing. You'll pull your working yarn on the green to the back of the piece or towards you. And I'm just going to yarn in, and we'll start on our blue. And just tug to make sure everything is tight. Alright, so for row 10, do chain up as normal. And this is what we should have so far. So for this last row, turn it over, help we're working with it. We are going to do the last 3 before the corner in green. So we're not going to skip and add another one like we did in the last row. This is just kind of going to round out the little froggy's face. And so we're going to switch at the end of this cluster. So we're going to switch at this gap and the 4th gap. Alright, so this is the cluster that we're going to change color on. You've probably got it down by now. Going to do our first DCs like normal. And on the last one, we'll do our first little stitch. And then we'll bring our green up and change it. Alright, and then the 3rd gap from the center is where we're going to switch back over. Let's do our 2 DCs like normal, and then the last one, we'll do that first pull through, tuck that to the back, and take our blue, just pull through. Tug on everything to make sure it's tight, and we'll just keep right on going. I'm gonna go ahead and trim my green too. I don't have to worry about it. Alright, and since this is our last row of the bandana, once we get these last 3 DCs in here, how I like to fasten off is I like to make 1 extra chain, and then snip your yarn, pull it through. When you tug on it, that extra chain tightens down and makes a little knot, so it's not going to come undone. So this is what our bandana is going to look like for now. And so what we're going to do is flip it over, and we're just going to tie off all of our loose edges and weave everything in. So I will meet you back after I've done that and we're ready to start on the edging. Alright, so once we have weaved in all of our ends, it is time to start on the edging. So I've got my white yarn, and I'm just going to make a slip knot. So I usually hold it in the dominant hand. I'm going to wrap it around my index finger and make a little X, and slip off that little loop and tuck the working yarn underneath it so it makes a little line. And just tuck that through, and it should tighten, and one of your strands will like tighten it and loosen it. So I'll just slide my hook onto that. And so because I'm lifting it, I'm going to start on the left side, but you basically want to start on one of the corners that lines your like back edge that's going to lay against your forehead. So I'm going to start on the left side, and I'm just going to go into this the top of this last stitch on this side. I'm going to yarn over and slip stitch. And then to make the first tie, I'm going to chain 42. When I get to the 42, I am going to yarn over, go through the second chain, you're going to pull up a loop, go through 2, yarn over, go back through that second chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, go through 3, basically making the DC2 bobble stitch. And then I'm going to go back through that second chain and slip stitch. And this is just going to make the little pom-pom on the end. So for the rest of the way back till we get to the edge down here, we're going to slip stitch. This is just going to strengthen our chain and leave no loose ends. So I'm just going to slip stitch all the way back up. So when I get back down to the base, I'm just going to start doing single crochets along this flat edge. And you kind of just have to pick and choose where you put it because this edge is all bumpy from where we worked into it. But I usually try to go into the stitches as much as I can. Or if it's like the edge of it, I'll try to go through 2 loops instead of just 1. That way it looks more uniform. So you'll just kind of stitch your way all along this edge till we get to this other side. Alright, so once we finish that last stitch on this corner, you can kind of see what the top of the bandana is going to look like. And so what we're going to do is exactly what we did over here with this tie. So we're going to chain 42, 2 DC bobble stitch at the end, and then slip stitch our way down. And I will meet you back when we get finished with that. Alright, so once we have made this second tail, we're going to start making the edging that goes around the rest of the bandana. So I like to do a scallop edging on these. I think it's just really cute. And so since we've already started working into this 3DC cluster, what I'm going to do is single crochet into the back loop, if I can catch it, until I get to that gap. Oh no. Oh, this is embarrassing. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to single crochet. That one, this one, and this one. And the reason I do back loop is because it just leaves a really nice clean edge, and I like how that looks. So because we're also going to work our scallops into the back loops. So in the gap, we're going to do a single crochet just to start us off. And so to do our scallop stitch, we're going to do 4 DCs into the back loop only of the middle DC in this cluster. So I'm going to go through, just going to do 1 DC, 2 DC, 3 DC, 4 DC. So it looks something like that before you secure it down. And then in the gap, we're going to go through and do a single crochet. And so your result should look like that. So do it one more time. So in the middle DC in this cluster, we're going to do 4 DCs. 1, 2, 1. And then in the gap, we're going to do a single crochet. And so you'll start to see it taking shape. So we're going to do that all the way until we get to this last cluster. We'll do something just a teensy bit different. Alright, so now that we are at this last cluster, the only thing that we're going to do different is instead of 4 DCs in our scallop, we're going to do 5. Just because there's just a little bit of extra wiggle room down here, and I've found that if you only do 4, then it tends to like want to roll up on itself, and I don't like that. So we're just going to do 5 instead of 4. And then into the corner where the chain 2 is at is where we're going to make our single crochet. And that is one side done. It's starting to look good. So now we're going to do the exact same thing coming down the other side. So we'll do a 5 DC scallop in this first cluster, and then the rest will do 4 DC scallops. I'll meet you back when we get to this last little cluster on this side. Can you hear my pouty dog in the background? Just a second. Just a second. I know. Alright, so when we get to this last cluster, we're going to single crochet like normal. And then you should only be able to see like 1 or 2 because this tail started on it. So just go and do a single crochet in the back loop only with these stitches, and then sometimes I'll go right under where the tail is at and do another single crochet. And then the only thing left to do is to cut your yarn, pull it through, and then I usually tie these 2 tails together just to keep them secure, and then you'll just weave in your ends. And so the last thing we need to do is just add our details, our little eyes and our little smile, and then our bandana will be done. So let's jump into that. Alright, so the last thing we have to do is make our eyes and our mouth. So I'm going to make mine in black, and what I'm going to do is make a magic circle, and we are going to single crochet 6 stitches into the circle. So when we have that, we are going to tug on our tail to tighten it. And then I'm going to go back through the first stitch and just slip stitch. And then I'm going to lock this in place by making an extra chain and trimming the tail with enough room to stitch it on. And so that's how we make an eye. Let's make our other one. Alright, we have both eyes. And in addition to that, I've also got a piece of yarn that I have left over from stitching on mouths on frogs. And so I'm actually going to do this guy's little mouth first, since I've already got this piece out. So we are going to use these 3 gaps to make our mouth. So I'm going to go up through the left one and leave enough yarn behind to tie it off, down through the middle and up through the right one. And just tug it tight enough. It doesn't have to be like so tight that there's no gap. You want to be able to see it. And go back through the middle and up through the left one. And then we're going to repeat that just to double up our yarn. And when I get back to the middle, I like to go in between my pieces of yarn, and you can actually catch one side, I don't know if you can see it, one side of this cluster, this first stitch. And you'll just tug, make sure it's nice and snug, but you can see everything and it looks good. And then on the back, we'll just tie it off. And we'll weave in our ends. And that's how you make his little mouth. So for the eyes, I like to start with the tail that was our working yarn. And I'm going to thread my needle. And it doesn't matter which eye you start with. This is just how I found to do it too. Do what feels right to you, because this is just how I found that it works good for me. So our eyes are going to go right over top of these 2 gaps. And so what I like to do is go through this stitch on our top. I'm going to go through the stitch next to where we finished off on the eyeball and go back through that stitch. With the same yarn, I'm going to come up through this bottom stitch, just through the first DC by the gap. And you come up through one of these stitches, does not matter which, and go back through that same gap that we went through. With the other yarn, since this one wasn't directly attached to a stitch, I'm just going to go through the stitch first in the eye and go down through this top stitch in between the first and the second DCs. And then I'm going to come up about where I approximate the gap to end. And I'm just going to go through one of the stitches in the eyes that are nearby. And go right back down through that hole. And so that's how I usually sew on my little eyes. And you can like tug on it and adjust it to make it looser or tighter. I just like them to be secure. So, and then on the back, we'll just tie it off. I tighten it, make sure it's snug, and tie it off. And then we'll do the same thing for the other eye. And with that other eye sewn on and all of her ends taken care of, that is the end of this tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed making this bandana along with me. This is one of my favorite projects recently, so I'm glad that I could share it with you all. If you are interested, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate your support. This pattern is also available on my Etsy, so if you'd rather read the pattern off a page, then you can check that out at the link below in the description. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate your viewership, and it means the world to me to know that someone out there is getting something out of the content that I make. So thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!